Welcome to the Mind Spark, bringing you the latest news from around the world. The news broke like a thunderclap on a clear day. Frantic calls and social media posts erupted from the border. Truck drivers, families, and supply convoys were being turned away. The Alaska Highway, the vital land bridge to Alaska, was suddenly closed at the Beaver Creek crossing. RCMP officers handed out official notices, access denied. Panic rippled through border communities. In Tok, Alaska, gas stations saw lines snaking for miles. Rumors of a security threat or diplomatic collapse spread, but no one knew the truth. The steady stream of trucks carrying essentials had stopped. The silence at the border was deafening, a symbol of a broken promise. Families were separated, dreams interrupted. The highway, once a path for people and commerce, was now an impassable wall. The message from Canada was clear: the old rules no longer applied. On June 21, 2025, the world watched in stunned silence as the longest undefended border became a front line. The blockade was a profound shock, challenging the very identity of the North American partnership. For decades, the free flow across this border was taken for granted. Now, everyone was left with a terrifying question: what happens now? The shutdown was the explosive result of a simmering trade war. It began weeks earlier, when the Trump administration imposed sweeping tariffs on Canadian lumber, aluminum, and agriculture. Ottawa saw it as an economic assault. Prime Minister Trudeau promised dollar-for-dollar retaliation. Canada prepared its own tariffs and searched for leverage. They found it in the Alaska Highway. The escalation was rapid, each side doubling down, diplomatic channels freezing over. The usual partnership was replaced by accusations and threats. For Canada, this was about national pride and standing up to a powerful neighbor. The decision to use the highway was radical, a last resort. When negotiations broke down, the order was given. Barricades went up. The Alaska Highway, once a symbol of cooperation, became a weapon in a new kind of war. Canada gambled that isolating Alaska would force the US back to the table. The stakes were enormous. The world watched as a vital artery became a pawn in a high-stakes chess match. The economic pain was immediate, but the political consequences were just beginning. The blockade was a dramatic, high-risk move. Canada hoped the US would blink first, but both sides were digging in. The trade war had become a test of wills. The Alaska Highway is more than a scenic route, it's Alaska's lifeline. Stretching nearly 1,400 miles from British Columbia to Delta Junction, it's the only reliable land route for most of the year. Over 70% of Alaska's goods, food, medicine, fuel, arrive by this road. Built in 1-2 as a joint US-Canada project, it once symbolized partnership. Now, its closure exposed Alaska's vulnerability. Shipping by sea is slow and costly, air freight is limited. Every truck carries tens of thousands in goods and hundreds cross each week. The shutdown instantly froze this supply chain. The highway is also a critical link for people, military families, workers, tourists. Its closure trapped people and paralyzed commerce. The road became North America's most important choke point overnight. Alaska's connection to the rest of the country was suddenly, starkly fragile. The crisis was no longer theoretical, it was real, and it was now. In Fairbanks, the blockade's impact was immediate. Grocery shelves emptied, milk and baby formula were rationed. Sarah Jenkins, a mother of two, worried about her son's formula, delivered weekly by truck. The crisis was no longer distant news, it was personal. In Anchorage, hardware store owner David Chen watched his building materials stuck in Canada, threatening his business and the construction season. Gas prices soared, and people began hoarding essentials. The state government urged calm, but anxiety grew. Alaska's pride and self-reliance turned to fear of isolation. Businesses scrambled for alternatives, barges and air freight, but capacity was limited and costs skyrocketed. Small businesses faced existential threats. The psychological toll deepened daily. Alaskans were resilient, but now felt trapped in a political battle not of their making. The blockade exposed just how dependent Alaska was on that single road. The message was clear: Alaska was on the brink. Its people were resilient, but their isolation had never felt so real. The crisis was no longer about politics, it was about survival. The blockade wasn't just Ottawa's decision, it was a united Canadian front. British Columbia and Yukon, whose industries were hit hardest by US tariffs, led the charge. Premier John Horgan declared, "We will not be bullied. The Alaska Highway is Canadian territory." Provinces across the country rallied behind the move. The federal government secured consensus, framing the blockade as national defense. The plan: the highway wasn't closed, but subject to a massive transit toll. $10,000 per truck, $2,500 per car. The toll was a political statement, not meant to be paid. Revenue would compensate Canadian industries hurt by U.S. tariffs. The Canadian public largely supported the bold stance. Protests and national pride surged. The blockade was seen as necessary and just. The United Front gave Ottawa the cover for such a risky move. Washington saw it as a provocation. Canadians saw it as standing up for themselves. The province's support made clear this was the will of a nation, not just a government. The message to the U.S. was unmistakable. Canada was united and resolute. The Alaska Highway had become a symbol of sovereignty. As the political crisis raged, wildfires erupted across northern British Columbia and Yukon. Plumes of smoke choked the sky, and flames cut off the highway in multiple places. The road, already closed by decree, was now physically impassable. Military and firefighters battled the blazes, diverting resources from the blockade. For Alaskans, hope of a quick resolution vanished. The supply chain was broken, not just blocked. Remote Canadian communities faced evacuation, trapped between politics and fire. The wildfires complicated blame. Canada cited the disaster. The U.S. accused them of delay. The truth was lost in the smoke. The crisis had become a perfect storm, political and natural disaster intertwined. The rhetoric escalated as quickly as the crisis. President Trump condemned Canada's actions, calling it a betrayal and threatening powerful responses. Prime Minister Trudeau, calm but firm, defended Canada's sovereignty and demanded an end to U.S. tariffs. The two leaders were locked in a public war of words, neither backing down. The U.S. lodged formal protests, citing treaty violations. Canada countered, insisting the highway was sovereign land. International bodies called for restraint, but their pleas were ignored. Legal battles began. Alaska and U.S. business groups prepared lawsuits. Canada readied its defense. The conflict moved from border to courtroom, but legal solutions would take years. Meanwhile, Alaskans and businesses paid the price. The war of words had real-world consequences. The alliance between the two nations was unraveling in public view. The world watched as old friends became adversaries. The crisis was no longer just about trade, it was about trust and power. The fallout was immediate and severe. The cost of this standoff was growing by the day. Weeks passed, and the blockade became the new normal. Barges and air freight kept Alaska afloat, but at a steep cost. Businesses closed and the scars deepened. The highway, once a symbol of unity, stood silent and scorched. Negotiations began, but trust was gone. Talks were secret, tense, and unresolved. The U.S. refused to lift tariffs. Canada refused to open the highway. Both sides were trapped by pride and politics. The world watched, alarmed. If these allies could fracture, what hope was there for others? The crisis exposed the fragility beneath decades of friendship. The question was no longer just about reopening the road. Could the U.S. and Canada ever truly repair their relationship? Even when the trucks roll again, the road ahead will be long and uncertain.